Have back James Rogoski, who's talking to us from Canada. And I think, sorry, no, California rather. And I think last time we spoke was about 6 months ago. I was trying to remember, James, but anyway, and I think quite a few things have happened since then. So I'd like to concentrate on this topic really about what we can do as individuals, as therapists, and working in healthcare and things. And also like what are the ramifications for us, perhaps if we did nothing at all? What would happen? What is the worst case scenario that could happen?
Well,
And so,
thanks for having me. I appreciate it. There's been a bunch of secret meetings in the last 6 months, so there are many things to reveal.
yeah, yeah, sure. And I know you've been working at this for at least 2 or 3 years, haven't you? And you've put a huge amount of energy into and the passion into what you're doing. And could you just start with like why? Why is this so important for us and for you?
Well, it started really when I was compelled to wake up at 4 in the morning by some force, call it what you want, go search on the internet for something, which, that in and of itself is not unusual. I'm always digging into, information, looking for something, but
Yeah.
not usually, out of a deep sleep at 4 in the morning. And I went to a website, Health Policy Watch. I believe they're out of Geneva, and started looking through their blog. And in one of their blogs, it said that they had obtained a document, and the word document was hyperlinked. So I clicked on it and I downloaded it. I started reading it, and I got a shiver down my spine. I'm like, what is this?
Hmm.
And I had only 4 days prior to that, I had published an enormous article about all of the discussions that were going on, uh, pushing towards what everyone has come to call a pandemic treaty.
Yeah.
So on March 24th of 2022, so it's almost 2 years ago,
Hmm.
I had published this big article. Now, the treaty did not exist at that time, not even a draft. It was just in discussion. And there were quite a number of foundations and organizations, a lot of money. You could just tell by, the documents and the graphics and everything that they were doing, that they were pushing for this treaty. But the document that I found 4 days later on March 28th was not about that at all. It was amendments to a different agreement. So there's two tracks here that people got to keep clear. The international health regulations were first agreed upon in 1969. I might ask you where you were and what you were doing when they were supposedly landing on the moon in July of 1969, whether they were on the moon or a Hollywood soundstage or whatever. In July of 1969, at the same time, there was a 22nd meeting of the the World Health Assembly,
Yeah.
and that's when they agreed to these international health regulations. Well, who the heck was paying attention to that? Everybody was talking about the moon landing.
Right. And
And so
when you say who they had this meeting, who are you talking about? You talking
the
about
World Health Assembly, which is all of the members of the World Health Organization,
okay.
send delegates once a year.
Right.
This one happened to be in July, but they've settled in on the last week of May is when they meet on a regular basis. Now, all of the delegates who go to these meetings to represent each country, every country gets one vote. And that's an important place to just kind of stop and linger a little bit. China and India with 1.4 billion people, um, Great Britain, maybe what, 60, 70 million people, something like that. The United
Yeah.
States, 300 and some million, um, all get one vote. And
Mm.
all of the tiniest little nations you could imagine also all get one vote.
Uh-huh.
And so that, is really a big issue because with amendments to the international health regulations, they just need a simple majority. And so, if 98 to 100 nations agree to something, that's all they need. And it could be a small segment of the population that wants it, but it would apply to everybody. So when I saw that document, which had been proposed by the Biden administration, I mean, I literally felt a shiver down my spine because I realized that that was totally different than what everybody was talking about, which was this drive to enter into a new agreement. These were amendments to an existing
Right.
agreement. And so I've been in that rabbit hole for 2 years now. I'm trying desperately to fight my way out of it. I really want to get out of the WHO and on with the new. We need
Yeah.
to be focusing on what is it that we want.
Sure.
But, until June, I'm focused on shining light on, what is it that they're actually doing? Nobody, the vast majority of people are completely either unaware
Yeah.
or totally confused because it can appear to be overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of very, quite scary stuff in there, isn't there, around like censorship. What was it, Article 14 and 15, and the whole stuff around gain of function. I mean, it's all quite, quite scary stuff, right?
Mhm.
Could you just because you mentioned this before, like what's the difference? I know you don't like the word treaty, so so you talk about like a pandemic treaty, and then there's the health regulation. Could you just describe explain what's the difference between those two things?
So at the very least, because there are many more things going on, but at the very least with the WHO, there is a um, group of people who are negotiating amendments to this 1969
Yeah.
International Health Regulations.
Yeah.
And there's another group who are negotiating a totally new agreement.
Okay.
And they're very, very different. And unfortunately, the information's been cross-pollinated between both of them.
Right.
So some of the information from one has been wrongfully attributed to the other.
Okay.
And so everybody's head is, all scrambled up, and hopefully we'll sort this out. If you want to talk about what people call the treaty
Yes.
first,
Yes.
way back in 2021, really before I even started paying attention to this, they had an independent panel that put out a report, and they very clearly said that they recommended that all of the nations enter into a framework convention, and they wanted to have up to $31 billion a year for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, and
Hmm.
up to 100 billion for an emergency. Something's going on, we need that money, we need it now,
Mm.
right? And so I think that should be something that people just hold in their awareness. That's what they said they wanted out of the gate,
Mm.
and that really hasn't changed. A
Mm.
lot of different words, a lot of different versions. And so after that report came out, you kind of have to erase, probably, I'm going to guess, you and your audience have come to, a certain awareness of things that are, I'll just say, not in alignment with the prevailing narrative. And
Mm.
so if you've got beliefs that don't line up with the official word, put those aside for a moment, because this isn't going to make any sense, because it's not making sense.
Mm.
What happened in December of 2021 is the nations called for a special session of the World Health Assembly. They normally only meet once a year, but they had a second one. In, and on December 1st, 2021, the declaration that came out was the nations requested that the WHO oversee negotiations for a new agreement. And it's really about a trade dispute, because the nations were unhappy that all of the wealthy nations were gobbling up all of the contracts for the jabs,
Mm.
and they weren't able to get any. Now
Mm.
you have to suspend, how lucky they were that they couldn't get these things, but they haven't come to that awareness yet. And there's a lot of factors that infringe on that. But
Mhm.
they said, hey, you guys, you're keeping all the jabs. We can't get any. These are life-saving, wonderful, beautiful technology. That's not fair. That's not equitable distribution. So they want equitable distribution of pandemic-related products. So out of the gate, people need to understand this is not about health, because they're not having an inquiry into, well, wait a minute, why would you want those things? They've got some problems.
Mm.
That's not being discussed at all. Not a single person in the room for almost 2 years now has raised a single question about whether or not what they're pursuing is actually wise.
Mm,
They all want a piece of the pie.
mm,
And so what we're dealing with here is arguments, negotiations over money and the distribution of wealth and intellectual property and manufacturing know-how and distribution and logistics and so forth and so on. If you see it now, I had the great benefit and advantage of having watched in November of
yeah.
2022, the Indonesian health minister gave a presentation to the B20, not the
Mhm.
G20, the big name, but they
Yeah.
have a parallel business meeting. Okay.
Mm,
And he learned and was aware of something that was about to happen. It wasn't necessarily secret, but he was raising everyone's awareness. And what he said to the business leaders in November of 2022 is, hey, the United States and all these other nations are putting together the World Bank Pandemic Fund. They're going to be giving out grants to build out the infrastructure for the global health security agenda. And he said, this is a great business opportunity. Go invest.
mhm.
And so if you put on your financial advisor cap, okay, just pretend, um, look back over the last 4 years and ask yourself, if you had been in the pandemic response business, um, boy, that was profitable. And so what he was telling the business leaders,
Yeah.
they're setting up multi-billion-dollar funds to build out the infrastructure. Go invest. And so at that point, even before the amendments were made public in December, I had a different view of what was really behind all of this, what was going on. And so in December of 2022, they released the proposed amendments.
Yeah.
And to this day, they have not made public any revisions. And so the new treaty has 12 points in it. It has many, many points, but I picked out 12.
Yeah.
And when you look at the core of what this new agreement is, from the point of view of the business model that it is in alignment with,
Yeah.
you realize that this has got nothing to do with health. This is a venture capital business bonanza.
Yeah.
I look at it, quite frankly, as organized crime. What they want to do, there's 12 points. I'll try to touch on all of them really quick here. It's a framework convention that would set up a new bureaucracy. And the idea is, think about the Framework Convention for Climate Change
Yeah.
from 1992. They just had in December the 28th Conference of the Parties.
Mhm.
Thousands of people go, they make decisions. And because all of our nations agreed in 92 to the framework, whatever they come down with every year just automatically gets implemented.
Mhm.
And that to me is the core. If you don't know anything else about the treaty, go to chapter 3 and understand that it's setting up what I would call, just an endless zombie bureaucracy that just, you can't kill it. It just keeps coming back year after year after year. Billions of dollars of contracts to buy products to prevent and be prepared for the next problem. Well, if you want to keep that inventory flowing, you need a pandemic all the time.
Yeah. I'm wondering, James, because looking at the news, I mean, it often feels to me like this is a fait accompli. They've kind of decided to do this anyway, and the whole process of so-called consultation, although there isn't any, is sort of going out the window. I mean, I know there was a movement here. There was a petition to get this debated in the UK
Mhm.
Parliament, which was it reached its number, but it was rejected. Right? They didn't want to even debate
Well,
it.
that particular one was a little bit different. I'll go through the petitions. Okay. There was a petition in May of 2022
Yeah.
before, the assembly. And what was going on then is really very interesting to me. Anyways, I mentioned to you earlier,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm watching a theatrical production and nobody else is in the theater. I've got a front row seat and I'm paying attention. It's really entertaining. Back in May, someone in the UK put forth a petition requesting to debate the pandemic treaty.
Yeah.
But at the time, what I was talking about were amendments to the international health regulations. So you can see, going back 2 years, right out of the gate, there was this mixing up of
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
So that petition got over 100,000 signatures like that. It was just a couple of weeks. And the UK Parliament ignored it
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
11 months. It wasn't until April of 2023 that they had a discussion about the treaty. Well, they certainly missed the opportunity to talk about what was actually happening. And
Mm.
so I'm going to shift gears a little bit and tell you what was actually happening in 2022, because it's astonishing. I mentioned earlier that the nations said they wanted the WHO to conduct these negotiations for a new treaty. They did that on December 1st, 2021.
Yeah.
They were unhappy that they weren't gaining access to the products. A month and a half later, on January 18th, 2022, the United States submits proposed amendments to the international health regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't say anything about equitable distribution of products, actually put more requirements on the nations, and we'll talk about that hopefully. And they, to their credit, the Biden administration did it properly in the sense that there's a rule, Article 55, that says they have to give 4 months notice.
Mm-hmm.
So January 18th was barely 4 months notice from the end of May assembly. And in the 4 months that the nations had the opportunity to view those amendments, they said, no, thank you. Did you not hear a word we said? We told you we wanted equitable access to pandemic related products, not more requirements, for us to give you things.
Mm.
And so those amendments that Biden proposed crashed and burned. One of the things that he was trying to do was to shorten the implementation period of any new amendments from 24 months down to 6, which is just not enough time to consider major changes in international law, have a discussion and debate and so forth. So his amendments were completely kicked to the curb. And astonishingly, what they actually did was, in the middle of the assembly on May 24th, 2022, totally in violation of Article 55 that says you got to have 4 months notice, the United States, United Kingdom, the European Union, Japan, Australia, a handful of other nations submitted a new package of amendments, only
Mm.
5. And this is the part that it's still to this day astonishing to me that no one in the media has said anything about this. I've been trying to get people to pay attention to it. 4 days later, on May 28th, they put out a document that said that they adopted these illegitimately submitted amendments, but they never bothered to actually vote. They just
Right.
said they adopted them. Okay.
Yeah.
And 18 months later, we did get Rob Roos from the Netherlands
Uh-huh.
and
Oh, yeah.
11 other members of parliament
Yeah.
wrote a letter to the Director General of the WHO, Tedros Ghebreyesus, and he said, we're looking at these purported amendments, but we can't find where anybody ever voted. These are all null and void.
Yeah.
And not a peep from the media, nothing.
No. No, no, that's,
So,
it feels like it's a sort of fait accompli that they kind of made a decision. Because I know you've talked about, I mean, well, yesterday, the Chancellor of the Exchequer here stood up in Parliament and announced this new production facility for AstraZeneca in Oxford, right? A whole massive thing, expansion of what they're doing there. And I think you've talked about this thing in Dubai they're building, right? Or some sort of distribution center.
long
They're
built,
doing
yeah.
that all over the world, right? So it
Right.
feels like, well, they're just going to do this anyway. And I suppose the question is, what can we do about it? And I know we talked earlier about, well, how to find out who's actually pulling the strings and who can approach. Because I know that you said, like in Australia, the government refused, didn't they, to reveal, even with a freedom of information request, who was actually negotiating these things, which is absolutely outrageous. But here in the UK, I have no idea who is negotiating these things. Do you know?
Well, all man, there's 20 things to talk about.
Okay, sorry. Yes.
First and foremost, I'll give you some gentle pushback on the fait accompli because they are having trouble.
Okay.
And most importantly, this might not mean anything to people in the UK or other nations, but here in the United States, about a decade ago, Hillary Clinton, and when she was Secretary of State, and then Barack Obama as president, signed us into something called the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You
Yeah.
guys are in the wrong pond, okay? So
Yeah.
in the Pacific Rim, they were trying to put together a trade deal, and they signed into it
Hmm.
before we, the people, got any idea of what the heck was going on. And
Mm.
so what happened was we did learn about it and um, made such a stink about the fact that they had done that secretively that it became such a toxic issue that no politician could speak in support of it.
Hmm.
And so when this was in the election cycle when Donald Trump was elected, and when he came in, it was already, this would be the place to use the word, it was a fait accompli. There
Hmm.
was no way this was going to go through the Senate. He unsigned it, and so we're not participating in that trade agreement. So I am very much aware that people power, just people learning what it is they're doing and getting it clear and speaking up about it and making it be an unacceptable, untouchable topic that if you're in support of this, you're doomed.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, let me explain what this treaty actually is. We touched a little bit on it. It's a framework convention
Is
that
it,
would,
sorry, James, is it called a treaty? Because I know you don't like that word. So what's it actually called?
they've
What?
called it many times. If you go to the WHO Constitution, which most people don't even know there is such a thing, right?
No.
Article 19 says that the WHO has the authority to negotiate a convention or an agreement.
Okay.
So they've called it many things. They've called it the convention, agreement, or other international instrument. Then
Yeah.
it was the CAII. Then it was the CA plus. Then it was the Bureau's text and the compilation text. And the latest version, official version in October, is the proposed negotiating text for the pandemic, WHO pandemic agreement. They're supposed to come out with a new version tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
So if you've never heard of this, maybe you didn't miss anything. I mean, I've been watching the show all along, but you can come in on season 5 or wherever we are now.
Okay.
And whether they make it public tomorrow or they quietly circulate it and it has to leak out and we find it, we read it and talk about it. I can talk about a version that snuck out from their private little meetings in the middle of February.
Yeah.
And so they have always said that they wanted it to be a framework convention, but they've never called it that.
Hmm.
So changing the language to hide what it really is part of what they're doing. Well, 20 years ago, the WHO did adopt or negotiate, and the nations adopted the Framework Convention for the Control of Tobacco Products. But the minute you realize that this is a framework convention and you realize that the reason why we're having such insanity in the world of climate and energy is you just have to look into the framework convention for climate change. You set up a bureaucracy, they meet every year, they get to decide your future, and you don't get to say anything about it. That's a bad idea for anything.
Mm.
So if people only know that this is another framework convention, that's all you really need to know. But here's what they want to do. They want to take billions of dollars and have a massive expansion, take money from the global north, which is not the northern hemisphere. The global north is another strange term that basically means wealthy nations, which also includes Australia and New Zealand, which are not obviously in the northern hemisphere, right? So again, they get confused, but essentially they want wealthy nations to kick in money to build out the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex in the poorer nations
Hmm.
because they missed out on the jabs the first time around. They want a piece of the pie.
Mm.
And so the core to all of this is what they call One Health surveillance, where they literally, in the latest document, they redefine healthcare workers as individuals who are involved in surveillance.
Mm.
Just go, wait a minute, that's not what I thought a healthcare worker's job was,
Mm.
but that's their new definition. And what they mean by surveillance isn't cameras and audio recording or GPS tracking. They mean surveillance of every snippet of genetic material that you could ever imagine finding anywhere. Swab up your nose or in your mouth or some other orifice. If you go to your veterinarian's office and you give them a stool sample, your chicken coop, your pigsty, your horse, corral, or whatever it might be, they're surveilling wastewater. Okay, I've spoken to people in southern England and all of the mussel and oyster shells and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The pollution that comes, through the sewage treatment plants that are underperforming
Yeah.
ends up in your food, and you've got, contaminated food with E. coli or whatever it might be. They're looking. I don't know how many bat caves there are in England, but wherever you could possibly find any kind of excrement,
Right.
there's going to be some kind of something that could become a pathogen with pandemic potential.
Hmm.
And so they want to then put that into the WHO coordinated laboratory network. They want to have genomic sequencing labs where, all of these samples can be examined, and they want to set up what they call a pathogen access benefit sharing system.
Hmm.
If you can go back in your mind to early 2020, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, it was revealed and then it was pulled back, but there was a genetic sequence that was revealed. And people said, oh, look, it's got HIV in it, it's got furin cleavage sites. Here's, SARS-CoV-2, the Wuhan, actually, it was the Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 genetic sequence that came to be known as SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
Well, that's maybe 30,000, 33,000 base pairs. In the grand scheme of things, that's a tiny little data file.
Hmm.
Then, when South Africa found Omicron along with Botswana, same thing, small data file, really, in the grand scheme of things, but worth billions of dollars. The genetic sequence for a pathogen with pandemic potential that a pharmaceutical company would take and turn into drugs or jabs is beyond a gold mine. I mean,
Hmm.
it is unbelievably financially valuable. And so that's the new gold rush. What they're arguing about is when South Africa passed along the genetic information of Omicron,
Mm.
they did what they thought they were obligated to do as a member of the international community. They handed over the information, and the international health regulations are supposed to protect nations who are transparent, and nations are not supposed to put in travel restrictions and so forth, sanctions or anything like that. But that's not what happened. Europe and many other nations did block travel.
Mm.
And then they watched Pfizer and Moderna take that information, put it into the boosters, make billions of dollars, and they couldn't get any of the jabs that actually came from the information that they passed on. They're not happy about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the pathogen access benefit sharing system is designed to put tens of billions of dollars into building out the infrastructure to go looking for something that could then be said to be disease X,
Mm.
profitized, take that and have a contract, a standard material transfer agreement. Hey, we'll give you that information, but you got to share the benefits, and benefits means money.
Mm.
They want to have a scientific committee to oversee gain of function, not outlaw it. and be in alignment with the Convention on Biological Weapons. They want to oversee it. They want to speed up the regulatory approval of drugs and jabs, oversee the global distribution and logistics network, which you mentioned, I think, earlier. They
Yeah.
have a distribution hub in Dubai that's 20,000 square meters, which
Right.
is 4 football fields.
Yeah.
So imagine the money to to dish out the contracts
Yeah.
to fill up 4 football fields with pandemic related products. And they don't want to hold pharma liable for any of that. They want everybody to be quiet about it. They don't be spreading any misinformation about any of this.
Mhm.
And what I'm looking at is that is not how you would prevent the next pandemic. That's how you set up an organized crime syndicate to profiteer from the next pandemic. You
Mm.
put all this money into all these products, all this research and development, laboratories, gain of function testing. You got to have something scary come out of that to turn a profit. All the money would be coming from government. They don't care really whether people actually take the jabs or not.
Mhm.
Once they get the money for manufacturing and delivering them, they don't care. They don't
Mm.
care about the side effects. They don't care about the harm that they cause. What we're dealing with here is organized crime on a level that is almost incomprehensible. But
Mm.
I think that anybody can read the quote unquote pandemic treaty, accord, agreement, framework convention, whatever you want to call it. If you read chapter 1, you got to realize that in their definition of sovereignty, one of the aspects of sovereignty is that nations have sovereign rights over their biological resources. They're like, we found this pathogen. What's it worth to you? And
Yeah.
and this is what these negotiations are about. And luckily, this isn't good versus evil. This is really big evil versus a whole bunch of little evil who want to be bigger. And they're arguing over, how do we get the intellectual property and the manufacturing know-how and the investment capital to build this industry in every nation around the world, do the searching for pathogens, bring them into laboratories, do the genetic sequencing, do the gain of function, so that they can scare their own people and profit from it.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with here. And I have every faith that regular men and regular women all around the world can read this document. So I put it up on stopthetreaty.org.
Yeah.
Now, take a moment, come back next week. We'll probably have a new version for you because they're supposed to drop the new one tomorrow. Whether they actually put it up on their website and I can report on it remains to be seen. But I don't think it's going to be dramatically different than the one that we currently are looking at. And anyone who looks at this says, well, wait a minute, isn't that how we got into this problem in the first place?
Mm. I mean, as far as I understand, the things that concern me and perhaps concern our audience is like this, it's like it feels a bit like what happened through the whole coronavirus thing on steroids. It's
Mhm,
like to the max, like in
mhm,
terms of censorship, what you're allowed to say. I mean, I was censored, a lot of
mhm.
us censored, taken down, and then, lack of freedom of movement, all that kind of stuff, again, much more restrictive. And then the apparent ability of the WHO to declare a pandemic or on very flimsy basis, well, or not even scientific basis. I
Well,
mean,
to
it's
to
kind of,
add to that, okay, to add to that, and again, it's really important for people to understand that there's two separate
yeah, so
negotiations
I might
going
be
on,
confusing them
right?
here.
And it's inevitable because everybody does. And so when people go to look at the quote unquote treaty, framework convention, agreement, whatever the new document, right? The new
Yeah.
one. Um, if you look at a couple of definitions, right? Sovereignty is, you own your pathogens, okay, because they're valuable.
Hmm.
And healthcare workers are looking for pathogens. They're doing surveillance.
Mm.
And we want to put money into hiring more healthcare workers. Can you see how this 1984 Newspeak language, if
Mm.
you say to somebody, oh, well, we need more health workers, right, for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, but you actually understand that they're redefining the terminology,
Hmm.
right? Sovereignty is you own your pathogens. Healthcare workers are looking for pathogens. They
Hmm.
want to have an early alert warning. They currently, the Director General, pretty much, this is all the way back from 2005, pretty much, if he decides that he wants to, he doesn't need any statistical information, any proof. He can declare a public health emergency of international concern,
Mm.
PHEIC, fake. What happens then is, even if he just did that for no good reason, here in the United States, very specifically, I revealed this a couple years ago
Yeah.
on um, January 19th, 2017. The CDC changed the rules, final ruling that they submitted on that date. And it essentially says, well, our health minister, the Secretary of Health and Human Services,
Yeah.
can declare in the United States a public health emergency. And the only justification he needs is if Tedros declared a fake, we can declare a fee, public health emergency, right? And you look at it, you go, wait a minute, that was put into the Federal Register on the last full day of the Obama administration.
Oh.
And so what they did is they set up authorities, if you will, to make our health minister essentially a dictator in the sense that he can declare a public health emergency as long as Tedros does. And then all of the laws that were quickly put into place said, well, as long as there's a public health emergency, all of the normal rules don't apply. You got to use all of these rules.
Mm.
And people didn't realize what was really going on. Oh, normal rules are out the window. Let's put the Defense Department in charge of this project.
Mm.
It's there's the way many of the emergency use authorizations were signed off on, it says, oh, well, this product is authorized for emergency use, but it's not a clinical trial, which wipes out the Nuremberg protections, which are basically for clinical trials. So all of the laws that you would think apply with the stroke of a pen, no, 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 don't look over there. You need to look over here. And people like Catherine Watt and Sasha Latypova and Karen Kingston and many other people, did look over there and they did see how everyone was being gamed.
Yeah.
But the average person didn't get access to that information because the narrative that they want you to hear is be afraid, be very afraid, disease X is coming. If we've got the solution. It's classic Hegelian dialectic. You create a problem, you show up with the solution, and you put the money in the bank because you've got people getting their government to either just make money or go into debt, hand it over to the pharmaceutical industry. And the lesson that they learned from the last 4 years is you can get people to fall for that. But they didn't get enough people in the low and lower middle income countries. And so what the negotiations are is they want a piece of the pie. They want to be able to do that.
Mm.
It works really great. If there's an group of activists causing a little bit of trouble, all they would have to do is go find a sewage system manhole cover, put a dipstick down there, and claim, oh, we found some new polio or we found some new Ebola, we found something. Got to lock down that area where we're having trouble with all these people giving us a hard time. Scare the daylights out of that group of people,
Yeah.
coerce or force them to be, injected or do whatever, quarantine, whatever it might be, and then report that on the news to spread the fear everywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
People, hey, we've got this new jab that's available, go get it.
Yeah.
And then they get to say, oh, we stopped the next pandemic. Aren't we so wonderful?
Yeah.
And do it again, and do it again, do it again, and do it
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're still saying that. There was a politician who said it yesterday on the BBC, we saved 6 million lives, literally, he
Yeah,
said
prove it. Name one life that you saved. One, just
that.
one.
I
Whose
mean,
life was saved? How
this is,
many lives were destroyed?
yeah, a lot. I mean, and the mental health of a lot of people, I mean, I'm seeing that in the
Mhm.
clinical particularly with young people. It's been devastating.
Yeah.
And this involvement of the military complex, it was interesting to see how that played out with the COVID thing when we had a military unit actually embedded in Downing Street, in the Prime Minister's house, directing what could be said. I mean, that's not conspiracy theory. That was definitely happened. It was a unit from Hungerford, not far from here, and also not far from, we have Porton Down, which is a famous, you've probably heard of Porton Down. It's like um, the biological weapons military place, right? And so I'm wondering, how does this play into the whole military industrial complex, really? I mean, how
Well,
are they?
it's best exemplified by what I was talking about with the World Bank Pandemic Fund. Okay, the United States Defense Department is contributing $5 billion over the next 5 years, starting in 2023, to building out the infrastructure to go looking for, essentially potential biological weapons, pathogens with pandemic potential, build out the laboratories to do gain of function and turn them into what they call medical countermeasures, but really should be called aggressive biological weapons. Go stick those in people's arms under the guise that that's going to prevent them from getting the very thing that they're digging up and working on.
Mm-hmm.
And so the awareness, one of the things that I want to make sure we very clearly get people to understand is the way you expose this fraud is to comprehend it, is to understand that it's not what they say it is. Don't listen to what I have to say. Don't repeat what I'm saying. That's hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
Go read the actual documents and ask yourself, is this really designed to prevent the next pandemic? Or is this designed to go looking for trouble so that people who can profit from it can scare us the way they did over the last 4 years?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to fall for this again? And are we going to allow nations to invest in it? Why would we give national resources when money should be spent for people who are dealing with heart disease and stroke and cancer and leukemia and tuberculosis and malaria and diabetes and everything else under the sun? Any money that's going into looking for trouble is money. How about all of the people who were harmed over the last 4 years? There's no money for them, but
Mm-hmm.
there's money for laboratories to look for pathogens and do gain of function.
Mm-hmm.
I I was about to say, are these people out of their minds? Well, they're not, because they know that it's a spectacularly profitable business model.
Mm-hmm.
And they look the other way. Oh, nobody's being harmed here. Don't look at the excess deaths or the sudden deaths or any of the health issues that are happening. Don't talk about that. That's going to infringe upon our ability to turn profit by scaring people and
Mm-hmm.
offering them another jab. And I have every faith that regular men and women can see through this criminal operation, this organized crime syndicate that they're trying to put into place, and realize that you can stop it by exposing it. That's all
Yeah.
you need to do. What I encourage people to do is go to stopthetreaty.org. Currently, I have the latest version. There will probably be a new version. Their next meetings are the last 2 weeks of May. They may have more meetings because I don't think they're going to get it done. They're having a lot of problems because they're arguing over money, and we need to expose what they're really doing. So take your phone or your camera or whatever, print out any piece of it and just hold it up to the screen and say, hey, this aspect of this agreement, I have this opinion about it, and state your opinion, whatever it may be. Get your facts directly from them. Take any quote out of their documents and give your opinion about them. They cannot legitimately say that that is misinformation.
Mm.
That's actually, I've come to learn that misinformation is actually another word for exposing the missing information that they don't want you to see.
Yeah.
So they don't want you to see their documents. They would love if it would just slide right through with nobody paying attention.
Yeah.
because their concept is very simple. Your silence is considered to be consent.
Yeah.
So speak up.
I suppose one of the things that we come up against a lot, and we touched on this before we started this interview, is people's belief, and this is something that's promoted by the government, that we're doing everything in your best interests, right? This is for you to prevent from harm and all this kind of stuff. And that people, but if you look at history, that's never been the case. I mean, our history in the UK is pretty horrendous about how the ruling class have treated the
Mhm.
lower classes, right? And I mean, I was talking to you about this case in the 1970s here, which is not far from here in Dorset, where the Navy actually fired missiles full of sort of all kinds of bacteria and stuff onto the unsuspecting public, and they
Clearly for your benefit. Clearly.
and they admitted it, and it was written up in the journals of the House of Parliament. But what I'm saying is that people find that very difficult to believe, even if something is right in their face, and you say, "Look, this is what's going on," and they say, "No, that can't be the case." Then people are not that ruthless. They're not that disinterested in our well-being. So how do you break down? How do you
I
get
have
through
learned
that
I
kind of?
have learned that I never try to convince anybody.
Okay.
Share the information. A small percentage of people have an open mind and they can still think for themselves. When you find that small percentage of people, you build that relationship. You organize the people who don't need to be convinced. If I'll make up a number,
Mm,
okay? If only 1% of the population are open-minded and
mm,
can still think,
mm,
why would you spend your time trying to convince the 99% who
mhm,
want nothing? They don't want to know about it. Find the 1% or whatever the number may be. Identify who your allies are. Understand very clearly what exactly is going on. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Read the darn document, photograph, screenshot, or do a video of the actual document, one sentence, one paragraph, one whatever it may be, and speak to the facts that are coming from the WHO negotiations and express your opinion, make your own video, and then take your video and send it to everybody you could possibly imagine, not to try to convince them. Just send them the video and you go, hey, have you seen this? It's undeniable. You're taking a photograph of their documents.
mhm.
1% of people might go, what in the heck is going on here? Forget about the other 99%.
Right.
Work with the willing. They'll spread it. They'll spread. At some point, maybe some of the 99% who don't want to hear it, when they hear it the seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th time, or somebody that is not you tells them the same thing, this is when it gets really entertaining. I can't tell you how many people have come back and told me the information that I pushed out originally. Okay.
Right.
It goes around and around and around. Hey, Jim, did you hear about this? Oh, really? Wow. Thanks for telling me. It doesn't matter how they got to accept it. Maybe I dripped on them, somebody else dripped on them, somebody else gave them a little information, and then they heard it from somebody and they heard it in a different frame of mind. They have a different relationship with whomever. They trust somebody else.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. If you don't say anything, that process never starts.
No.
So be the media. Get
What
out
about,
your video camera and put a little video out there, put it on TikTok or Telegram or
yeah, yeah.
Twitter or Instagram or whatever. You never know. Your video with your opinion and your presentation may trigger a cascade
Yeah.
that if you don't do it, it's not going to happen.
No. I mean, what about writing letters and contacting your MP and things like that? I know you've talked about that before, and I think you've just written a letter to Tedros, haven't you? An open letter.
You can take that. I mean, that's about one aspect of this. I actually did not write the letter. That was
Okay.
credit due where I promoting it. Sylvia Berhardt in Switzerland wrote that.
Okay.
That's about the fact that, I don't think I mentioned this, so thank you for bringing it up. The deadline for them to submit
Yeah.
The final package of amendments to be considered in May is more than a month in the past. It was January 27th.
Hmm.
They're obligated to give us 4 months notice on the amendments, and they're silent. They know, and I've published this going all the way back to October. They know the rules.
Mm.
They said back in October they weren't going to meet their deadline, and they're just moseying along like there aren't any rules. And they had meetings in February. They're having a meeting tomorrow, and they're
Mm.
having meetings in April for the amendments. And if nobody calls them out on violating their own rules, they'll just keep going. And
Mm.
that letter is essentially saying, hey, Tedros, you're an upstanding man. You know that they're cheating, right? And we know that you would not allow that to happen under your watch. So, hey, Mr. Gabracious, why don't you let the world know that we're not going to be accepting any amendments
Hmm.
in May because they missed their deadlines and they are conspiring to try to cheat.
Mm.
Won't you be the upstanding director general and say, hey, we'll have to wait until next year because we didn't give everybody full. Well, we shall see what
Mm.
that fine upstanding director general of the WHO does with that information. So copy it and send it to him. Put it on a certified letter so you've got proof that he knows that they are trying to conspire to break their own rules. Now, I get it. People go, oh, what's a letter going to do? Well, what's not sending that letter going to do? How
Hmm.
about you send that letter to every media outlet you could imagine? How about
Mm.
you send it to every member of parliament that you could imagine? If you sit on your butt and you do nothing, then nothing's going to happen. If you
Yeah.
take action, it's another, a flood doesn't happen because one drop of water. A flood happens because there's an untold, unlimited number of drops of water that fall down from the sky. And the truth that they're trying to hold back has broken through the dam.
Mm.
So, add your 2 cents into that flood of truth. And this is just one piece of it.
Yeah.
And so contribute. Now is the time. If you sit on your butt and it fails, well, then you're part of the failure. If you
Yeah.
do something and I think I might have said that wrong. If you do nothing and the attempt to stop them fails, then you're part of that failure. If you do something and we are successful in exposing what they're doing, then you can hold that forever as, you did your part. Everybody needs to do their part.
Yeah. I know we got to stop in a sec, James, but coming back to like who to write to as well, because do you happen to know who it is in the UK who's negotiating with the WHO on these things?
One of the articles that I did a year ago had every year they print, all of the people who are participating in the meetings. Essentially, it's complicated in the UK, but essentially, it's your foreign minister, David Cameron. He's in charge of international agreements. Now, people get confused because it's a health related issue.
Right.
And I don't know off the top of my head who your health secretary is or health minister, but people get confused and they don't realize that the executive branch of government has the authority to enter into international agreements.
Hmm.
In the UK, Parliament does not have the authority to confirm or ratify or whatever word you want. What is supposed to happen is the foreign minister's office is supposed to submit any agreement to Parliament for
Hmm.
21 days, and Parliament has the option to reject it. But they didn't do that in 19, I'm sorry, they didn't do that in 2022 with the amendments that were illegitimately pushed through. They just ignored it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so any international agreement in the UK, now this is specific to the UK, there's a 2010 law that members of parliament are supposed to be given the opportunity to review for 21 days after it's been signed off on.
Yeah.
But at this moment in time, the best thing that people could do is actually learn what is really going on, because everyone is confused. Learn what is really going on and express your opinion about any piece of it, to spread it all throughout your country and identify the people who still have some brain cells that are talking to each other and can think for themselves, and organize the people who are willing to continue to raise awareness about this. Because I think when people read the document and they understand that this is setting up a criminal operation to go looking for pathogens with pandemic potential to make more money, scare and harm more people, it is so brutally obvious that the only way you don't oppose it is you don't comprehend what it really, really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Very busy man. And the best site for people to look at, is it the Substack, your Substack, jamesroguski.substack.com?
The hard part is just spelling my name, James Roguski, ROGUSKI.substack.com. And I encourage everyone to call me. My phone number in the United States, in California, is 310-619-3055. Made a lot of friends all over the place. You can use Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp, or send me a text message. You know, I have to add in a country code for wherever you may be. But 310-619-3055. Happy to help anybody sort through this. I've been messing around in the WHO rabbit hole for 2 years. So I think I could probably help people get up to speed real quick.
Yeah. As I said, there's probably going to be a film made about all this stuff in 20 years' time, I reckon. And you'll be,
hopefully it has a wonderful ending.
It's got to, hasn't it? It's got to.
Yep.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.